Join the Premier and other special guests as we look at all things Cayman, both present and future. This is Talk with the Nation. Here is Donna Bush.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Talk with the Nation here on Vibe 98.9. This evening on the show, we will be discussing education in the Cayman Islands. And in just a few minutes, I will be joined by the Honorable Minister of Education, Mr. Rolston Anglin, as well as Bordentown MLA, Mr. Dwayne Seymour. Now, remember, Talk with the Nation is a live call-in show, so we will be taking your calls during the last half hour of the show this evening. That is around 6 o'clock. Now, the number for you to call when we open the phone lines is 946-9898. Also, you can join us by Facebook.com/Talk with the Nation. And you can also tweet us at TWTN. Again, it's all happening right here on Vibe 98.9, Talk with the Nation, a show presented by Premier the Honorable McKeeva Bush. Each week, we will be discussing the issues that matter to you, our listeners. The Honorable McKeeva Bush is off island this week, so he will not be joining us. But again, the Honorable Minister for Education, Mr. Rolston Anglin, as well as Mr. Dwayne Seymour, MLA from Bordentown, will be joining us. We will be back on Vibe 98.9 in just about a few minutes. Please stay with us on Talk with the Nation. We'll be right back.
All things Cayman, present and future. This is Talk with the Nation with Donna Bush on Vibe FM, presented by the Premier, the Honorable McKeeva Bush.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Talk with the Nation here on Vibe 98.9. This evening, I have the pleasure of being joined by the Minister of Education, Mr. Rolston Anglin, and Bordentown MLA, Mr. Dwayne Seymour, to talk about an all-important subject to every one of us at one point or another, education in the Cayman Islands. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks again for being here with us and Talk with the Nation. Again, to our listeners, this is a live call-in show. We're going to be taking your calls at the end of the show. That number to call is 946-9898. Remember, you can join us by Facebook.com/Talk with the Nation, or you can tweet us at TWTN. All right, Mr. Anglin, let's get the evening started with you, talking about education at all levels. Can you begin by breaking down for our listeners out there the levels of education in Cayman as we speak, for instance, primary school, and where we go from there?
Well, Donna, obviously, one of the things that we believe as a government, and we've put our money where our mouth is in terms of emphasis and in terms of how our budget has been allocated and what areas have been protected consistently. It has been education, and it's been about delivering on our manifesto promise from 2009, which was to really get back to basics and really be serious about education reform. One of the worst things you can do with any education system is to have interventions that are, I would say, always well-intended, but to have those interventions without really doing the hard work and the work that's difficult for politicians to do, because a lot of times in our pursuit to do, we wound up messing things up, to put it quite frankly, you need to take stock and really understand where your system is. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, once you have taken stock and understood where your system is, it's then about how you're going to collaborate with participants within the system, which will be your students, your teachers, your parents, the wider community, right, about how you're going to move forward and how you're going to have a real solid reform agenda. I think if we go back to the very beginning, I mean, the very first thing that the chief officer and I did when we took office in 2009 was to visit every single school in our public education system, and not just do our tours and sit down and tell people what your thoughts were, right, but to actually sit and listen. And we met with every single set of teachers in our country. We met with the senior management team separately, mm-hmm, that is the principals, deputy principals, and senior teachers. And then we met with teachers, mm-hmm, separately. We met with the department separately, because we felt it was very, very important to give the people who are the chalk face the thousands of years of teaching experience that's represented across our system. Because that's what it is, thousands of years when you add up all of the cumulative experience of our teachers, that very important access to us. And then we did a health check survey. Coming out of that, the findings were rather alarming. So we did a health check survey, an anonymous survey online tool that we used, where we actually gave teachers a further opportunity to give us even more detailed input. And then that, of course, was a lot more anonymous. And so whilst we got a lot of feedback, obviously, in our tours, there would be those who might have not necessarily wanted to share in front of all of their peers. So we felt, you know what, let's give everybody a second opportunity in a different forum,
right?
And let's see what feedback we get. And it was very good to see that it was very consistent.
Okay.
The feedback was consistent. The concerns were consistent. It was about not being valued. It was about not being listened to. It was about complaining about how the system had become very dictatorial, where there were simply dictates from the center, no real levels of consultation, not really listening to them about what the priorities were.
Okay.
And I give you a classic example. The reason, or one of the main reasons the government chose early years as our number one priority for this term was because of the overwhelming response we got at primary level, at primary school. Overwhelmingly consistent response we got from our primary school teachers and principals saying to us, we have year one children who are coming into our system wholly unprepared to start school.
Okay.
They also talked to us about the school age and the fact that there's a huge mismatch. We've pretty much adopted the UK national curriculum, yet we were starting our children at less than 5 years old, and they started children at 5.
Right.
There's a lot of people who out there might say, well, hold on, what's the difference in a few months? Any of us that have young children or think back of our young children, think about how children grow by leaps and bounds over those months.
Right.
And a few months when you're very young can make a huge difference. Right. A huge difference in terms of developmental readiness to learn and those sorts of things. And so it was, I say all that because we haven't ever had a conversation in this medium, and I think it's sometimes very important for us to reflect. And I can say that without any hesitation that Mr. Seymour and my other colleagues have been wholly supportive of our reform agenda and have really been there to push forward, recognizing that whilst a reform agenda is often, you can often have resistance, that if I've always been a believer that if you do things the right way, and if you are actually genuine about consultation, you see, to say you're having consultation and to do it in formats and ways in which people don't feel as though they're really having the impact that they should, then that's when people aren't going to buy in.
Right.
But I'll hand over to my colleague who wants to make a few points. But I wanted to just sort of paint that's where we started from, and obviously in our system we have a thriving early years system at the private level. Right. Government is now pretty much back to having reception in every single primary school. We of course have our public and private primary levels, high schools, and of course we have an ever expanding offerings of tertiary education. And certainly, hopefully, as we have the conversation evolve over these next couple of hours, I can share some of the very exciting changes of things that have actually transpired at all those levels over these last 3 years.
All right, well, we'll be talking about that in a little bit. Mr. Seymour, you want to share some words with us on education in Cayman right now?
Thank you, Donna, and thanks for having us here, and thanks to the Minister for inviting me here. And I am so thankful to the Minister for what he has done for Barton Town, because I guess when you look at everything, Barton Town primary schools, Savannah Primary and Barton Town Primary, was two of the schools that benefited from the new expansion. Some very beautiful buildings up there.
Yes, they are.
That we are afforded with, and I'm very thankful that Barton Town was a district that was chosen for those schools to be expanded. The thing about it is as the minister spoke about earlier, terms of reform. When the minister brought these changes to us, because it's a lot of work, and it definitely involves a lot of people from a lot of different departments and the ministry. And the thing that the minister spoke about earlier in terms of continuity and change in leadership, and coming in and finding a system and trying to tweak it, and not tweaking it too much to disrupt the actual classrooms that are taking place, the classes that are taking place, but to try to move as slowly as possible and as careful as possible, and to look regionally and internationally, as the minister would also always do. And I know some of the early childhood learning concepts came from the minister's trip that he took to, and he can speak to this a little bit more, the trip that he took to Europe, and looked at some of the systems up there where there's some of the best performers in terms of education.
Right.
And some of that was brought back here, and I know some of that was formed part of our policies moving forward with the new team. But it's difficult. I won't tell you that the minister had an easy time trying to pull this all together, especially coming into it new, and trying to pull the different people together, and finding resources, especially as thin as it is. And definitely the education department needs more resources, but at this time we understand that we can't afford it, and that is one of the areas that we said, we're not going to try to cut much from education, because it's so important.
Exactly. We're going to take a break right now. We're going to be back with Talk with the Nation in just a few minutes. Our viewers, our listeners out there, please stay tuned. We'll be right back on Vibe 98.9.
Email Talk with the Nation now at twtn@vibefm.ky.
Welcome back to Talk with the Nation on Vibe 98.9. We are talking education here on the show today. With me in the studio, if you're just joining us and listening in, are Mr. Dwayne Seymour, the MLA for Bordentown, as well as the Honorable Minister of Education, Mr. Rolston Anglin. Gentlemen, when we left off talking about some of the reform that's been made within the past 3 years and 3 months since the UDP government was elected, and was challenged with reforming education and putting it back on good footing here in the Cayman Islands. But let's move on now and talk a little bit about how different the system is now than it was 3 years ago when you all took over. Minister Anglin?
Well, I think first of all, one of the huge differences is that we have tried to interject some very important institutions in our system. We have right now, for example, our Principals Consultative Council. Okay. I'll be going to their first meeting tomorrow, because one of my things that I want to achieve, certainly before the House is prorogued in March, is to ensure I focus on that and making to get that really up to the level that I want it to be.
Okay.
The vision of the Principals Council is very simple. Firstly, it was obvious in moving around a system that's in an island this small that schools weren't adequately talking to each other.
Right.
And that you had pockets of best practice, and so you might have one school that did one thing extremely well, and the thing that I brought to bear was, if you're doing something great, it needs to be celebrated.
Right.
And if it's happening great at Sir John Cumber Primary School, it should also be happening at the Bordentown Primary School.
Right.
It should be happening in East End. It should be happening in the Sport Bay Primary School. So bringing principals together was about that, but it was also to address this whole issue about consultation and about how we would best be able to really collaborate with our teachers. And so the second piece of the concept of the council is that when we have matters that we want to take out and get views on, and we'll come to one of those in a minute, about something that's very exciting that we're going to be taking to the public very shortly, and to our schools very shortly. we wanted to have a real vehicle to do that. And so the idea is that when we documented for the first time, for example, some policies that had grown up and they were sort of word of mouth, and some people did it one way, some people did it another way, and we crystallized those into actual written policy form.
Okay.
When we did that, we didn't want to simply be guilty of what we found as a problem, which was dictates from the center. And so we sent lots of them out in draft form for consultation. And so we did that through the Principals Council, where each principal could then take that policy back to their individual schools, get feedback, so that we were coming with the most informed position. Because it's difficult to get consultation, meaningful consultation, when you do have a system that has quite a few hundred educators in it. I mean, our system overall in terms of staffing, our ministry is 800 plus. Of that, in terms of persons that's associated with schools, we're talking about 700 people.
Wow.
And so, and it's 500 something of those that are educators. It's not easy to get that feedback. And so that is the other key piece of the work of the Principals Consultative Council. That's hugely important for the system. But the reform that we've made at secondary, where we now have our Cayman Islands Further Education Center as an institution that I believe is going to continue to grow from strength to strength. That's a significant change in our system. We had what I like to call a cliff system. Our children came to the end, they sat their external exam. Those who did really well, well, they glided and they flew. Those that didn't do so well, they just fell. And so the country for a long time wanted a number of things. It wanted technical and vocational education within the system.
Right.
The public wanted second chances. How do we best give very young, because the other thing we have to take a step back, Donna, to think about, these are kids we're talking about. These are kids taking very important exams in their lives at 15 and 16 years old.
That's quite a feat
15
itself. Yeah.
and 16 years old. And so what we did was, we first of all, we said, look, we were going to put in place 2 all through high schools, to go back to what we had. I can say to you that one of the things that I had always said to myself, that if I had ever gotten into this position in life, was that I was going to deal with what used to be called the Cayman Islands Middle School.
Right.
I went through that system.
And it works.
And I felt very strongly that the middle school system in our particular education environment was really unhelpful and wasn't benefiting children.
Right.
I believed that what happened was, one, it was well intentioned. If you look at the theory of it, the theory was there was this break in between primary and high school.
Right.
But for me, what happened in reality was we went through a primary system that ended at what used to be called the National Achievement Test. And so it was huge competition around standards and achievement, because you wanted your children, every principal wanted to have the most children in the top 15.
Right.
And so they were really, really competitive. Then you got to the middle school, where you simply went in and you left. And I'm not saying they weren't caring and thoughtful individuals there, because they were. But how it fit into the whole scheme of things, from where I sat, as especially thinking back as a student, didn't work. The number of my friends that I know should have been in sixth form with me, who didn't wind up, in my opinion, they went in the middle school, and by the time they came out, they were lost. And the other thing that was a huge disadvantage was that we were changing campuses, tutors, teachers in every subject at an age where young people are sometimes most vulnerable and challenged, around 13.
Right.
So at the age of 13, we were taking young people and saying, go get a new tutor group teacher, go get a new math teacher, go get a new science, go get new biology, new chemistry, new everything, when they should be really, really in a settled environment, getting ready for their options years and to get into their O levels.
Right.
And so I felt very strong, and the government supported me 100% in this. The government felt very strongly that we needed to get back to having 2 all through high schools, where you left primary, you went into high school, and yes, there are still middle years. There are still middle school years.
Right.
But the good thing is you are in a school environment that is going to take you from that year 7 right up until year 11. You are going to have the same tutor, potentially the same math teachers, and you didn't have to make this huge shift. Could you imagine? I can remember the day, and John, I'm sure you can remember, my first day of going from middle school to John Gray was hugely disruptive. I mean, it was learning everything over again. New campus all over again, and so that has been a huge change for us in our system about ensuring that we made that sort of reform.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, I'm one of the products of middle school. When I actually went to middle school, I was one of the first persons to go to middle school in '79, I think it was.
Yep.
And when we get there, the building wasn't even finished. So that's how new it was. And that was quite a challenge for us, just moving from primary school to what you would call a big school.
Well, why do you think, Minister Anglin, though, or even Mr. Seymour, why do you think it took our education officials so long to really realize that part of the system wasn't working? I mean, so many kids were allowed to fall through the cracks because of that, and somebody had to come along and kind of clean it all up, which is sad, because then you're left with a society filled with young people who are disgruntled, who are not employable, and the story goes on, and they're unprepared. So why do you think, in your thinking, why was it allowed to go on for so long?
Change. It is about change and humans not wanting to accept change. Because here's the funny thing. Oftentimes, the public will be the first ones to get up and say, oh, yes, we need this, we need that, we need the other. And yet the minute a government thinks it through, does the research, gets a good policy position, and goes to do it, they then say, but hold on, why are you changing that? Right? And so it's been very interesting. We're 3 years now into Further Education Center. That program has grown from strength to strength. I believe that is going to wind up, when we look back educationally, as one of the most important reforms to have ever happened in the Cayman Islands. Yet, you get a couple of people who get upset about a specific case and situation, and then you hear a call for that to be changed, and why did we do it? Well, why did we do it? We did it because this country for 30-something years have said they wanted TVET options, and they wanted it in mainstream school.
Right.
Streaming, and when you decide to put a child on, not put a child, but give a child different opportunities to shine, is something you have to think through very carefully. There are some countries that stream very young. There are some countries that 12, 13 years old, they look at you and they say, oh, you're more technical in nature.
Right.
So we're going to put you on this track. Or you may be more academic, quote unquote, in nature. So you're going to go in this track. One of my, in the trip that Mr. Seymour spoke about, when we went to Finland, what was very, very interesting was the fact that they did that as well, but they did it at the end of high school.
Okay.
And it was refreshing to see the highest performing system in the world doing exactly what we had done in terms of our policy. Because at the time when we did it in our research, we had looked more regional, and we had looked at some of the North American examples, and we hadn't gone. Certainly, I hadn't looked at Finland as a specific reference point when we made this specific change. But to have gone to that country and seen that that's exactly what they do, and the key thing about the Further Education Center is that you get an opportunity to take a wide and growing range of BTECs, which is an accredited qualification out of the UK.
Right.
British based system that has really reformed many lives in the UK and giving them new opportunities and new hope. So we have that as your staple while you're there.
Right.
But also, equally importantly, you get opportunities for retakes.
Right.
And that is something we want to actually build in the future.
Sure.
Right now, one of our real weak subjects national is mathematics. And that opportunity, that important second chance to get your math qualification. And that's going to be a difference for a lot of young people, getting that math qualification. I saw a scholarship application just this week. Young person graduated from high school in 2009. And it was so wonderful to look at their portfolio. And by 2010, they had their math and were writing to thank me.
Wow.
Because at that point, they then received an offer from a UK university who had that, up until that point, hadn't given them an offer because they didn't have math as an O-level. And so very important that we have those second chances in our system. And really, that's what we have to build. And I think the key message that has to be out there is that we're talking about 15 or 16-year-old children.
Yeah.
Let's compare us to the United States. Understand that we're having kids, the high flyers go on to UCCI or A-levels to get a head start.
Right.
A head start in those heavy academic programs. But they're doing it at a very young age. Everyone else is not being disadvantaged.
Right.
What we're doing is assisting and making sure
That they don't fall
we
through the
get
cracks.
we get our children more prepared than ever before for life, because that's what's coming after their formal education is life.
We're going to stick a pin and we're going to take a break. But when we come back, Minister Anglin, I'd like to go a little bit more into details for our listeners out there who may not understand the further education program, a SciFect as the kids call it, and the TVET programs, and exactly how it works and what a day can be like for these students who attend classes there. We're going to be back with Talk with the Nation in just a few minutes here on Vibe 98.9. Stay with us.